There was a time when a single island ruled over a quarter of the earth. When red banners fluttered across distant skies, and the sun never set on its power. How did a small kingdom on the edge of Europe build the largest empire the world has ever seen? And at what cost? This is the story of conquest and control, of power and betrayal, of the untold rise and fall of the British Empire. Welcome to Echoes of Empire, where we bring the forgotten stories of Britain's past back to life. The story begins not with an empire, but with an island, isolated, ambitious, and hungry for power. In the late 1500s, England stood in the shadow of giants. Spain, France, and the Ottoman Empire dominated the seas, while England watched, small yet restless. It had no vast armies, no colonies, no wealth, only dreams carried on wooden ships. But within those dreams burned an unstoppable ambition. A fire that would soon reshape the world. Men like Francis Drake, John Hawkins, and Walter Raleigh became symbols of that rising hunger. They were explorers, merchants, and sometimes pirates, sailing into unknown waters, trading, fighting, and returning home with gold, spices, and stories that fed a nation's growing pride. Queen Elizabeth I ruled over a country ready to test its fate. When Spain sent its invincible armada to crush England, few believed the island would survive. But storms and strategy favored the English. The mighty Spanish fleet was shattered. For the first time, England stood tall against a superpower, defiant, victorious, and awakened. That victory changed everything. England was no longer a mere kingdom. It had tasted power, and it wanted more. The 1600s opened the door to a new world. Across oceans, untouched lands, and untapped riches called out to European empires. Spain and Portugal had already carved their empires in gold, but England arrived with a new weapon, not just soldiers, but merchants. In 1600, a charter was signed that would change history, the East India Company. What began as a trading venture soon grew into something far more dangerous, a private empire backed by the British Crown. Ships carried spices, silk, and tea from Asia, but they also carried guns, greed, and ambition. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, English settlers built colonies on the shores of America. Jamestown, Virginia, and later, New England, small beginnings of a vast expansion. They cleared forests, built farms, and traded goods, but behind every colony was a hunger for control, over land, over trade, over people. England's reach began to stretch across continents. Africa, Asia, the Caribbean, each became pieces on the board of empire. And wherever the Union Jack was raised, it brought both prosperity and pain. The British Empire wasn't just built by kings and queens. It was built by traders, sailors, soldiers, and ordinary men chasing profit and glory. But every conquest carried a cost, one that would soon darken the empire's golden light. By the 1700s, Britain had mastered the art of empire through trade. Ships sailed endlessly across the oceans, forming what came to be known as the triangular trade. From Africa came enslaved men and women, forced across the Atlantic to the plantations of the Caribbean and America. From there came sugar, tobacco, and cotton, feeding Britain's booming industries. In London, coffee houses buzzed with talk of wealth and exploration. Tea became a symbol of English life, but few thought of where it came from, the plantations of India, the fields of Ceylon, the suffering behind every sip. And then came the 7 Years' War, a global conflict that stretched from Europe to the Americas, from Africa to India. Britain emerged victorious, seizing territories and cementing its place as the dominant world power. The empire had grown vast, glittering, and unstoppable. But with power came arrogance. In the American colonies, resentment grew. Taxes, trade restrictions, and the arrogance of distant rule fueled rebellion. The American Revolution erupted, and for the first time, Britain's empire began to crack. Yet the loss of America did not end the empire. It transformed it. Britain turned east, toward India, the jewel in the crown. India became the beating heart of Britain's imperial machine. The East India Company ruled not through diplomacy, but through force, exploiting divisions, crushing resistance, and draining the wealth of an ancient civilization. In 1857, the people of India rose in rebellion, a massive uprising that shook the empire to its core. British reprisals were brutal. Thousands were executed. Villages burned. The rebellion was crushed, but its echo lingered. The company was dissolved, and India was placed directly under the British crown. Queen Victoria became Empress of India. The empire now stretched from the deserts of Africa to the jungles of Southeast Asia, from Canada's forests to Australia's coasts. It ruled through railways, religion, and rifles. Britain called it civilization. Others called it conquest. For every story of progress, of education, railways, and law, there was another of exploitation, famine, and blood. The empire claimed to bring light, but it cast deep shadows. By the early 20th century, cracks began to form. The cost of controlling half the world was rising. Nationalist movements spread through colonies. Voices once silenced began to rise, demanding freedom, dignity, and justice. Then came the First World War. Millions from across the empire fought under the British flag. Indians, Africans, Australians, all shed blood for a country that did not call them equals. The war drained Britain's strength, yet its empire survived. Barely 2 decades later, the Second World War erupted, and this time, it shattered the illusion of eternal power. Britain fought bravely, but the cost was unbearable. Economically broken, politically weakened, the empire could no longer hold its vast dominions. In 1947, India won independence. The jewel slipped from the crown, and others followed. Africa, the Middle East, the Caribbean, one by one, the colonies claimed freedom. The empire that once ruled the world began to fade into history. Today, the British Empire is gone, but its legacy endures, in language, in law, in borders, and in culture. English became the global tongue. Parliamentary democracy spread to nations far beyond Europe. Railways, education systems, and institutions remain reminders of both progress and pain. But history is never simple. The empire brought wealth to Britain, yet left scars on the lands it ruled. It connected the world, and divided it. It built cities, and broke civilizations. The sun may have set on the British Empire, but its shadow still stretches across the modern world. Every map, every flag, every nation carries echoes of its rule, echoes that continue to shape our present, and our future. This was Echoes of Empire. Subscribe for more untold stories from the heart of Britain's history.